Hi, I'm Dr. Flux, and today we're going to do a build guide on the Blitz. Now, the Blitz is essentially the same as the Free Runner, only with a solenoid, and this makes me really excited because I absolutely love solenoid blasters. Now, this is a pretty easy build, but there are a few steps you have to pay close attention to in regard to the wire lengths and how everything fits in here because it is a very compact build. There's not a lot of room for excessive amounts of wire. Now, we will be offering this blaster as a fully 3D printed and built blaster if you'd like to pick one up. We will also offer hardware kits along with 3D printed parts.
Before we get going any further, this is a LiPo battery mod. LiPo batteries do need to be handled with care, so please read the descriptions on the website, read all of your manuals with both the battery and your charger, and make sure that you're taking care of your LiPos, because they can be hazardous if not handled carefully.
For this build, these are the tools that you will need. We'll start with some of the consumables. So we have some slug slime for the trigger and then some Loctite blue for the motor screws, a razor, M2.5 Allen, helping hands, flush cutters, needle nose, a #1 Phillips, some solder, a flathead, wire strippers, soldering iron, and the heat gun. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right into the build. Let's go ahead and start with these brass inserts. There should be 6 brass inserts. That's 5 on top and then 1 at the thumb screw. This one's a little bit tricky, so let's go ahead and start with that one. Put it in there, sink that down. Now I like to take a flathead screwdriver and just kind of make sure that that is flush. Try not to deform the side here. And I actually like to try its fit test right now, just to make sure. Now it is still cooling, so I don't want to be too rough with it, but it does seem like it's in the right spot. On the top up here where the flywheel cage mounts, we'll take 2 of these and just making sure those are sitting flat. Now we have the 3 points where the top shell fits on. Do these top 2 here, flatten that down, and it should look like that. Now to wire up the flywheel cage. Now before we get started, I do want to note that sometimes you gotta take a flathead screwdriver and just kind of make sure there's no material in here because these motors need to set perfectly flush. We do the best that we can to post-process these before we ship them out, but sometimes a few little pieces end up in there, so that's why it's important to check. For motor polarity, we go ahead and set that there. We have the positive face this way, and then on this one, we're gonna do the opposite, so the positive is facing that way. And you wanna press these down and make sure that they're nice and flush. Once everything looks good, we're gonna put in the motor screws. Now for this part, we're gonna use some blue thread locker. Just gonna put a little bit on the motor screw and then repeat that 3 more times. And use a cloth or a rag or something to wipe down all the excess thread locker. Next, we are going to put on the Nightingale wheels. This is just done by pressing on. Make sure to give pressure on the back of the motor or you could break your motor mounts. All right, looks good. Now we're gonna do the positive. So that's gonna go right here. Let's go ahead and put these motor spacers down to help us prevent any bridging while soldering. For this section, I usually just cut a piece of material out right where I wanna solder up here. So you have a little piece like that. I also recommend bending these tabs over so that they're straight, but be careful with these, they can break off. I'm gonna start by tenning these leads. I'm gonna drop this down right on there and give that some solder. And let me just strip this end over here. And let me check that joint, looks good. Now to do the negative, it's gonna tag here and then go this way. And everything looks good. So when doing the bullet connectors, we try to keep the female side on the live side. So the motors are not supplying power to the system. So we're gonna use the male side for the positive. This is not required, but it's just good practice. And we're gonna cut this right about here and then strip that. Now when doing these bullet connectors, the easiest way is you take this little cup and you fill it with solder. You do that by just heating it up and then feeding in some solder in there like so. Kind of give it a little bit more. It's quite a bit. There you go. Then we tin this side and then it's a matter of just feeding that in there nice and even while heating it up. And then once it cools down, you have a bullet connector. Next up, we're going to give this thing some heat shrink. So just slide that on about right there and hit it with a heat gun. And onto the other side. You're just gonna heat it all together and push down. Basically have a little crucible and then you gotta let it cool. There we have it. And add a little bit of heat shrink. And there you have a flywheel cage. Now, this is really cool because you can actually repeat this multiple times with different setups. and you can essentially have a quick swappable flywheel cage, which makes this blaster really neat. Now to assemble the trigger group. So we drop the switch in here. Now we're gonna put this spring in. This is the longer of the two springs in the kit, but this is gonna go right into here, and then we can put the switch behind here. At this point, you can now drop this other side in to lock everything in place. And we have these 3 M3x14 screws. We're gonna start putting them in. I'm gonna start with the trigger to keep it from moving around. Just make sure not to tighten that one down too tight. As you can see, the trigger doesn't move freely. So I'm actually gonna back that off a little bit so it moves nice and freely. Then we'll continue putting these other ones in. Also, it's worth noting, you can actually put a little bit of slug slime in there. This, however, feels really nice, and I think I'm gonna leave it alone. Then we have a couple M2.6x12 screws that are gonna drop right into here. And we'll use a number 1 screwdriver for that. Now we're gonna wire up this part, starting with the center here, which is normally open. So we're gonna tag that, run through this channel here, and then we're actually gonna tag onto the COM for the rev switch. Now notice I have done a little bit of pre-tinning, which will help make this soldering a little bit easier. So let's start by stripping this piece here. Now this is going to go up here, and then we're gonna tag down here. So I'm actually gonna remove some of this. Okay. We check the bond. I mean, it's not the prettiest joint, but it will work. And to figure out the length of this, we're gonna go a couple inches past the grip. So about here, and then we're gonna make a cut. Now we're gonna tag the normally closed on the rev switch. All right, now we're gonna take the solenoid. We're gonna check to see how long this wire should be. It should be tagging at this bottom right here. So give it a little bit of slack. So I think about here is where we'll cut it. Yeah, looks like a good bond. So it should look like that. For this next step, we're gonna insert the trigger assembly into the blaster, dropping this positive lead all the way down. This is what will be later connected to an XT30. Let's drop this down. It just kind of sets in place like that. And then for the solenoid, we're actually gonna switch it over to this side so that the wire is coming up and over, as you can see. And then we're gonna wedge that in. If it's a little bit too tight, I've found that sometimes you have to come back and just kind of knock this edge off a little bit with a razor, depending on your print tolerances. But basically this whole thing is kind of a friction fit. So you just set that in there, make sure you don't crush this wire here, and then you just press the whole thing in. This wire right here will be our negative wire. I'm actually going to pull this out here, and then we're gonna grab our negative wire, which there'll be a bullet connector on this end when we're done, but I'm just trying to see the length of how much we need. It's really not gonna be much, so we're actually gonna cut that right about there. And we're just gonna strip that. I'm gonna leave a little extra here for the bullet connector, and then we're gonna jump in here. Might even start a hole with a razor, pry that open, so we can just drop that right in and solder that. And just to be safe, I'm actually gonna put a little piece of heat tape on that because this does get tucked down into this track here and could touch the solenoid housing. Now this positive lead is gonna come up this way, and we'll be installing the 2 bullet connectors here and here. And then this negative lead actually gets fed down here because that's gonna be your negative side of your XT30. And now for the bullet connectors, I have my cage here just to make sure I'm doing the right one, but it looks like it will be this one on this side for this positive lead. The length is really important because if it sticks out too far, you can't close the lid. So this one's actually a little bit tight. However, it's kind of good because it's not sticking up at all. So on this one, I'm gonna basically cut it just a little bit longer, right about here. We'll see what that looks like. Just like before, we're gonna fill the cup with solder. We're gonna strip this one, and I'm just gonna heat it all up and drop it in. Slip some heat shrink on there and hit it with a heat gun. Oh, sorry, it's a blaster. And on to the next side. Fill up the cup, strip it, and dip it, and throw some heat shrink on there. On to the XT30. Strip this, put a little bit of heat shrink on there, and then while I'm thinking about it, I'll actually do the other one too, so I don't forget later. And then slide the heat shrink up, heat gun. and the negative. Now to put a large piece of heat shrink over the whole thing. All right, let's check the length. Drop this in. I know that guy's tight, but this one seems like it's got a little bit more room to work with. You just got to kind of press it down in there, make sure it's all flush. This will make it a lot easier to assemble later. Looks good. So I'm going to drop these screws in here. These are M3x8. Now that that's on, let's check the fitment of this real quick. Okay, looking good. I'm going to go ahead and install the front of this. This is just done with a couple M3x8 screws and then the front piece. Okay, now to put the top on, I'm just going through and making sure everything's nice and flat. This will make putting the top on a lot easier. Everything looks good, so let's drop that on. And actually, everything fit pretty nicely. All right, let's drop the screws in. These are also M3x8. And now for the mag release. We will be using the shorter of the two springs and an M3x20 screw, and of course the mag release. Start by dropping this right in place, and then find that little recess here, and then just drop that in there. Then you just hold that all right there while you drop in this. And let's screw it in. Let's go ahead and test that. Make sure everything feels good. Nice. And now for the final touch, the battery compartment. As you can see, is a very wide open battery compartment. I'm gonna throw a LiPo in there now so we can test it. All that goes in there. We have our battery compartment, which we showed earlier. Yeah, really nice little pistol. Let's go ahead and fire some test shots. Got some Worker Gen 3s. Yeah, with the Kraken motors and Nightingale wheels, we're hitting around 100 FPS. Really nice little pistol. So that pretty much wraps up the build guide for the Chance Blitz. If you have any questions, email us at orders@addeddarts.com. I'm Dr. Flux. As always, be safe and happy foam flinging.